Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern14.com here to talk about LSU's football schedule. This is smack dab in the middle of our schedule preview. I think we have gone through 7 already. We're going to hit everybody, but it's going to be an interesting year in Baton Rouge, Blake. We talked about Florida yesterday and the coaching transition and an underachievement a year ago. Well, same thing with LSU this year. Coaching transition, a lot of talent on hand in Baton Rouge, some holes in the roster, and a very interesting and challenging schedule for sure.
Yeah, I think any of the SEC West teams, we always say, have a difficult schedule. There's a couple of teams in that division that are hard to figure out, and I think LSU's right there with that group. So I think it's an interesting schedule, but I think the bigger aspect is like it's more interesting because I don't really know what I'm going to get from LSU as a whole, and I think that's where again, when you compare it to an Alabama or Georgia, teams like that we feel pretty strongly, about winning a lot of games and being able to navigate different schedules. I just think with LSU, it's much harder for us to maybe go through the schedule and know exactly what to expect, just because I don't yet with LSU. I mean, it's a new regime, and but yeah, I mean, you're playing in the SEC West, so there's a lot of difficult games on there. You get Florida, of course, from the East. You get Tennessee from the East, who's going to be much improved. So yeah, that makes for a pretty challenging schedule.
Yeah, I say holes on roster. I think a lot of that's offensive line. Obviously, LSU has got a ton of talent, and it's got 4 quarterbacks too, apparently. But we'll
You only
talk
need
about
one.
that for another time. Yeah, what's the saying? If you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one. What happens if you have 4? Although that's
I'm only aware of being able to play one quarterback under
right.
center at a time, but
Yeah,
things may change. Listen, if you can figure out how to do that more than that, you're probably in good shape. So
I think the Steelers did that at one time, maybe. But
yeah,
I'm being a little facetious. I mean, they have some talent there for sure. So that nobody gets mad at this, let's clarify. But let's start with the schedule. A weird opener. Florida State in New Orleans on a Sunday, Blake. I don't ever remember LSU having an opener quite like that. Now, I know last year they went out to UCLA, played a late night, or I believe on Saturday night, but that'll be an interesting one in the Superdome, I
yeah,
presume.
big game, both teams. I would think. I think just based on again, these are two programs that have always had national championship aspirations. Of course, Florida State, that's not exactly been there for them in recent years. Have hit a stretch with plenty of ups and downs, and I think for LSU, it's a big game, and the reason why it's a big game, and it's what we always talk about with these non-conference openers or week 2 games. We were talking about some of the different ones who Florida plays Utah. We were talking about some of the other big kind of opening games that you'll have and the opportunities that are there. But for LSU, it's important because look, if you get this win, I mean, I think the way your schedule sets up, you got to feel pretty good maybe about that first, third of your schedule, just based on, how it kind of sets up getting all those games at home, even though this one is in New Orleans. So,
Yeah, that's a great point because you win that one. Next week is Southern, which Sagarin had about a 43-point difference on a neutral field between those two teams last year. 225th in the Sagarin was Southern, not ranked in any of the preseason FCS polls that I'm seeing. So that should be a walkover game. 2 games beyond that, New Mexico. We're not going to spend a lot of time there either. New Mexico is supposed to be, by the computers and the rankings that I'm seeing, one of the 5 worst teams in the FBS. And then in between, you've got Mississippi State, that also in Baton Rouge, and that is a series that LSU has dominated recently. LSU won that one last year when the teams played, and I think I read is 19-3 in the last 22 matchups between these schools.
yeah. So, I mean, that's why I think that, that game one against Florida State to me is like, it's just, it's
Yeah.
significant, right? Because it is like, it's such a huge game. Um, Kind of knowing what you're potentially looking at beyond that. Now, again, we'll even go further in the schedule in a second, but I think there's that's a nice start. I think if you're a team that is, you feel like, and a lot of people just look at it on paper and feel like this is going to be a kind of a transition year for LSU. I don't think that means they're going to, win 3 games or anything. I think it's more of maybe they're not competing for a national championship. It's more of kind of that rebounding year of trying to get back in the right direction and kind of put your stuff in if you're Brian Kelly and company and get ready to kind of maybe hit that full gear next season. Although again, they're not like they're throwing away this year, but I think this is a great way to kind of start your season off, especially like I said, I think the momentum they would gain from beating Florida State in that first game, going into those next three, which I think they'll be favorites in all three of those. That's a if you can get off to a 4-0 start, that's you're feeling a lot more different about your season and maybe the potential for it, even though we know the rest of the way there's a pretty tough schedule. So
Well, the middle part of the schedule, we'll call it the swing game portion of the schedule: at Auburn, Tennessee at home, at Florida, and Ole Miss in Baton Rouge. These are games where I'm guessing the point spread is all going to be single digits in any of these games. I'm not saying LSU is going to be favored in any of these. I would think that it would probably be that, depending on how the season goes, could be a slight favorite at home over Tennessee. Tennessee, the better team according to most people in the preseason. Ole Miss also considered the better team by most people preseason. But again, that one's in Baton Rouge. Road trip to Auburn. God only knows with the Tigers this year, given that situation. And a road trip to Florida, which is in a similar situation with LSU, in that it is transitioning to a new coach, new schemes, new quarterback, some depth issues in Florida. We mentioned LSU having some issues. Florida's really got some depth issues. So it could be a good time to catch the Gators if the injuries are piling up. But I think this October for LSU is probably about as interesting a month as any team in the league is going to have, because I could see any of these games going anyway.
yeah, I think this is the field goal month. I think this is where every game. I think every game
Right.
you're talking. I really believe that. I think every game you're kind of looking at it again from our vantage point in July. I think you look at it and say, all right, that's a field goal game. Like I think that are any of these teams going to be favored by a touchdown over the other? If you're LSU in any of these games, I don't think so. Like I think again, I think the Auburn game, I think that's probably a field goal, maybe more. I don't know. I don't think it's that much more though, right? Tennessee, that's one because it is in Baton Rouge. I think it'll point spread will be a little bit closer than it would be if it was in Knoxville. We're saying this like we're assuming that Tennessee is, like I said, I think they're going to kind of take off and maybe be in a really nice spot here by the time they get to this game. If they're not, if they've dropped the game or something, that's again something that's a little bit different. Same with Florida. We don't know what Florida's going to look like come October the 15th. We talked about their schedule. There's a lot of different ways that could go in by the time they reach mid October. And then Ole Miss, that's another game where I think that's a that's a close game probably. So it is. I mean, this is the defining stretch of the schedule because, like we said, what if they do start 4-0? Then you look at this and you're like, boy,
Mm,
there's a lot of opportunity here, but at the same time, theoretically, you could be underdogs in three of these four, right? The two
yeah.
road games at home against Tennessee, and then maybe you're a slight favorite home against Ole Miss. So there again is it's kind of we're doing this now because we find it fascinating to kind of go through these schedules. But I think this is specifically from all these ones we've talked about, like this is that one where this 4 game stretch, I have no idea what to expect, but I
Yeah.
think it's a lot of it's going to depend on what we see in the first 4 games. So
Well, LSU lost a close one to Auburn last year, then got beat, I think, 2 touchdowns to Ole Miss. LSU's won the last 5 against Tennessee. Of course, I don't think LSU and Tennessee play that often, so you're probably talking about several games there that don't really matter, because that was several coaches ago for both programs probably. And then Florida last year, remember LSU, I think was kind of the team that sent Florida on the skids. Went into Baton or won a strange game between the two teams, and then it just kind of went downhill from there for the Gators. But then you get a bye week, then Alabama at home. Now, I think this series has flipped. It used to be the road team won this game like a crazy amount of time. And it was like that for 15 or 20 years, I think, Blake. It just was whoever was the road team in this series was going to win the game. I think that's changed. Alabama's won, I think, 4 of the last 5 in this series. But that one could get interesting if LSU is rebuilding under schedule with Brian Kelly, if it can keep its offensive line healthy. I mean, LSU Alabama, last 20 years, that might have been one of the greatest rivalry games in the country, certainly in the league. So that's one to circle. Um, Road trip to Arkansas. which is going to be tough. UAB, which is not going to be a pushover. UAB is about 60th in the computer polls that I'm looking at and some of the human rankings. So a little bit better than average FBS team. And then a trip to Texas A&M to end it. And again, I said this in another video. Very interested to see where both these programs are at this time. Is LSU ahead of schedule in rebuilding? Is A&M having a disappointing season? Because I think now the Aggie fans are ready for a national title. If it's not going well, does Jimbo Fisher find himself a little bit on the hot seat? I just in several of these games this year in the SEC, this is a recurring theme. What kind of season are these teams having? Is there talk of coaches being fired? Those things, because I think that's going to have a lot to do with the outcome. And certainly that last 4 games for the Tigers after the break, all those are pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, that's why I think those previous 4 we talked about are so important because I think right now, I mean, they're underdogs in 3 of these 4, right?
Yes. Yeah.
They're
And
underdogs
you
against
and UAB
Alabama.
will not be a pushover, generally
Yeah.
speaking.
So, I
Yeah.
mean, as of right now, they're an underdog at home against Alabama. They're an underdog at Arkansas. Right, slight, but I think, as we said, I think there are higher expectations for Arkansas if we just look at the preseason projections and all that, which that's what we're going off of right now. And then at A&M, yeah, they're going to be the underdog there. So I think it is. I mean, the more you look at the schedule, the tougher it looks, just because I think it is still for us it's hard to get a grasp on what you're going to see from LSU because this is one where, like we said, if even if you start 4-0 or something, things could go south in a hurry with those next 4 games. And then, if you, let's say you struggle, I mean, I don't know, even 2-2 would be a struggle just based on the competition of those previous 4 games here. But, let's say you go 2-2 in this stretch. Well, for this last part, like we said, I think going 2-2 in the last part would be you'd be thrilled at that because I think that there's just going to be some challenges, like we said, with potential top 10 teams at this point in Alabama and A&M. I said it. I think Arkansas is going to be a very good team. So I think those are the kind of things that you look at and just kind of wonder is this is probably of all the schedules we've done, and I've probably said this in other ones, but I feel like this one has the widest variety
Yeah.
of record. And I honestly mean that. We've probably done half the league so far. But I think this one is the one with the widest range of, if you predict a record right now, I mean, I could go a lot of like more ways than I could with again, let's say if I was predicting an Alabama record or if I was predicting a Georgia or A&M, even like a Tennessee. Like I said, I look at Tennessee schedule and I feel like maybe there's not that wide of a range. I feel like with LSU, there's a huge range here.
Yes.
And again, I mean, really, you could go anywhere on the schedule, right? Like you could start and say, all right, well, what if they lose that opener against Florida State? And what if they lose at home to Mississippi State? And it's just, I mean, but they could bounce back and beat Tennessee at home. Like I think it's product of being in the SEC West. And I think it's also a product of feeling like this is going to be kind of you never want to use the word transition year if you're LSU, but I think it's just, you understand that to get back to the top of the SEC, I think it will take another season, maybe 2, for Brian Kelly to probably do everything he feels like he needs to do with the roster. So,
Well, 2 things. I think what you said was spot on. We talk about built-in wins in the schedule. LSU's only got 2. That would be
Southern
Southern and New
New Mexico,
Mexico.
yeah,
And the other 10 games, I'm not going to say they're all toss-ups because LSU is going to be favored. I mean, I'd be surprised if LSU's not at least a touchdown favored in New Orleans. I'm sure the line's out on that already. But Florida State at kind of a top 40-ish team, according to what I'm seeing. We talked about UAB not being a pushover. That's going to be one that they'll win, barring something crazy. So maybe you give them 3, but that's not an easy game by any stretch. It's not a
yeah,
give me. But I feel like the West is that way this year, Blake.
yeah.
I
I
feel
mean,
like
it's yeah.
every game not involving Alabama seems like a swing game to me.
I mean, look, there's some people picking LSU to finish last in the West, right? I mean,
I don't buy
I've
that,
seen
but
that. I
yeah,
don't either, but I'm just telling you, like you've seen that, but I think it's because there are people that are, kind of putting Mississippi State, Ole Miss, maybe a notch above them. I think for the most part, you're seeing Alabama, A&M 1 and 2. Then I think you're looking somewhere in that range of Arkansas, maybe Auburn. Like I said, Ole Miss. I mean, realistically, like think about that though. I don't think they're going to finish last either by any means, but
But someone has to.
But there's a slight, I think there's only a slight difference between, you know, a lot of these teams in the West. Again, beyond, to me, beyond Alabama and maybe A&M, depending on where they're at. And like I said, even Arkansas, maybe you put up there a little bit higher. But I mean, you tell me, it's like, we'll get into this more as we do our previews, but what's the big thing that separates an Auburn, an Ole Miss, a Mississippi State, and LSU right now? I think there's a lot of those tiny little details that are going to make a big difference. And when you have a schedule like this for LSU, that will make a huge difference just based on how the schedule's laid out. So,
Well, I think momentum, and I'm not a huge believer in momentum, but I think momentum might be more important this year in the West than it's ever been. And again, I talked about getting off to good starts and what happens at Auburn if it goes backwards, what happens at A&M if it goes backwards.
yeah,
For that matter, Mississippi State. I don't think Mike Leach is on the hot seat, but someone's good to win every game and someone's got to lose.
I'm going to
And
pull this up. Yeah, because I'm curious. I want to have this discussion real quick. I know it's going to
but
make this a
while
little
you're doing
longer.
that, let me throw in one more thing. I think I'm seeing every team in the West in the top 30 composite that I'm putting together, which that's using ESPN's FPI, that's using, I'll use Sagarin when that comes out, but I'm keeping a running tally of like, I don't know, I've got 6, 7, 8 sources so far. And I think the composite has got every team in the West in the top 40. So somebody's
Yeah.
going to have a bad season, even if they're not a bad team, probably.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like if you look, and I'm gonna go through these. All right, so Athlon, and we won't go through all of them. We'll go through the top two, which I think is Athlon and Phil Steele. Athlon's got LSU fourth in the West, but I think there's a in terms of the record predictions, they're slightly ahead of Auburn, who's picked last in the West. If you go to Phil Steele, LSU is picked last in the West, but it's I mean, because right, I think it's Alabama, A&M, Auburn, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, then LSU. Yeah,
Someone always finishes last in the beauty contest.
but all those teams are in the top 36. So it's like that to me is like we can say whatever we want, and you'll find a bunch of different opinions. But I think when you look at this schedule specifically, yeah, somebody's got to win and lose. And I don't think LSU is going to finish last, but I think that, like I mentioned, I do think they have the widest range of any SEC West team based on their schedule. And that could be a great thing, that could be a bad thing, just depending on what your expectations are. And that's why, like I said, I don't think if LSU, I'm not speaking for LSU fans here, but I mean, your expectations are not going to change all that much. You may understand that there could be kind of some things that you have to work on this year, but look, you're still trying to be at the top of the SEC. That's the whole goal, right? So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, we'll see, man. That SEC
Somebody is going
West,
to finish last in this division. How many fan bases think they are the team that should finish last?
yeah,
I would
that's
put
the
that
thing.
number at 0. Right.
I
But yet
I would,
someone is going to be there.
yeah, no, you're right. I think that the SEC West standings, to me, outside of Alabama, and like I said,
Flip a
maybe
coin.
A&M. I think those four teams. I really believe this. I mean, I'm telling you right now. I think A&M, Alabama, Arkansas are probably the top three. That's we've kind of touched on that, and we were basing that off of schedules too, right? Like we've gone through some of the schedules, and we're like, okay, those are not favorable, but they seem to set up okay for some of those teams. But it's like if you're telling me how to figure out the difference between LSU, Auburn, Mississippi State, and Ole Miss right now, I think it's hard to do. So.
Yeah. Any parting thoughts?
No, we'll have more of these on the way. Yeah, we've got, I don't know how many we've got left, but we've done quite a few. So if you just want to hit that subscribe button, go back to our channel, you'll see all of our, you can go to our football playlist and you can check out all of our schedule previews thus far. So there you go.
Thank you for watching. We'll see you again very soon.